I always believed private property was sacred. You mow it, you maintain it, you pay taxes on it. No one else gets to decide what happens there. At least, that was the world I thought I lived in before I moved into this suburban neighborhood, where appearances mattered more than common sense, and where a certain breed of neighbor thought authority was a personality trait. My backyard had always been my sanctuary, a stretch of green fenced off, filled with hand-built planters, sunlight threading through the trees like golden lace, and the soft hum of peace that only homeowners truly know. I worked for years to earn this escape, but apparently to one entitled resident and her friends on the HOA board, my sanctuary was theirs to manage. It started quietly, with glances from across the yard and clipped whispers carried on the breeze. A freshly elected HOA president, the infamous neighborhood Karen, began strolling past like she was appraising real estate for an auction. She studied my garden beds, my fruit bushes, my patio, mentally itemizing what she assumed belonged to the community. At first, I dismissed it. After all, adults don't go around claiming other people's yards. But this wasn't an ordinary adult. This was a suburban power fantasy queen wearing entitlement like perfume, radiating arrogance with every step, convinced her clipboard gave her authority over private land. Before I go deeper, if you're watching this right now, make sure you smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. These HOA and Karen stories just keep getting crazier, and trust me, by the end of this one, you're going to want to hear what happened next. Now let's dive back in. As weeks passed, Karen's hovering presence transformed into a clear obsession. She began loitering just beyond the fence line, staring inside as though she was waiting for something. Sometimes she took photos, trying to appear casual, but looking more like a hawk circling prey. She didn't speak to me, not yet, but she watched, and judging by the way her nose wrinkled at the sight of my personal lawn chairs and garden equipment, she didn't like what she saw. In her mind, she wasn't invading my privacy, she was surveying her kingdom. Then one quiet Saturday morning, I noticed strange footsteps in the grass. My gate was slightly ajar, something I never left unlocked. A patch of soil had been disturbed. Nothing large had been taken or moved, but it was a warning, a boundary crossed. A violation disguised as harmless curiosity. Later, I learned it was just the beginning. Karen had started telling neighbors she had plans for my yard. She believed my garden, the one I built, planted, watered, and cherished, was too nice to be for just one household. According to her, something so beautiful should be enjoyed by everyone, a utopian vision rooted not in kindness, but in entitlement. Rumors swirled quickly in neighborhoods like this. At the mailbox, a neighbor casually mentioned hearing that my yard had been designated as the new community green space. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. They didn't laugh back. My smile froze as the realization sank in. Karen had been speaking to the HOA board behind closed doors, or more accurately, behind my back. Days later, an official-looking letter appeared taped to my back gate. It wasn't mailed, meaning someone walked onto my property to leave it. The paper was water-spotted, but the bold headline was clear enough. Notice of community use rezoning. My own backyard, according to this self-appointed monarch, was being declared a public garden, without a vote, without my permission, without legality. She wrote as though her word was law. My yard, she claimed, was now a shared natural enrichment zone. And the kicker? I was ordered to remove private enjoyment fixtures, meaning my chairs, tools, and fencing. She gave me a deadline. The absurdity was so spectacular it felt like satire. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a power grab. My land, suddenly labeled a community amenity by a woman who couldn't grow a weed without filing a complaint first. I pictured her marching around town announcing new regulations, mailboxes repainted to her chosen palette, lawns trimmed to her preferred length, dogs barking only between approved hours. And now, my backyard designated as a community garden because she decided it should be. I had two choices: submit quietly like the other residents who feared fines and threats, or fight, not aggressively, not irrationally, but with precision. Because if Karen wanted to treat my land like a business asset owned by the HOA, then I would run it like one. And businesses come with invoices. So instead of ripping out my chairs or removing my planters, I printed my own notice. Not in anger, in pure professional calm. After all, if my yard was a community garden suddenly benefiting the neighborhood, then those benefiting needed to pay their fair share. I took measurements, calculated square footage, assigned reasonable monthly rent based on local land use rates, and added a neat administrative fee for unauthorized entry. Karen thought she was expanding her empire. She had no idea she had just become a tenant. When I posted the notice on my gate, "Invoice for unauthorized communal use of private property," I felt a spark of satisfaction, not pettiness, just justice. If she wanted to play land manager, then welcome to the paperwork. Her face the next morning when she saw that document fluttering in the breeze was the first crack in her self-crowned authority. Shock, confusion, anger brewing like a thunderstorm behind her eyes. But she wasn't defeated, not yet. For people like her, power isn't a responsibility, it's a fantasy, and fantasies don't die easily. She stormed off, no doubt to regroup, to plot, to twist her delusion into a crusade. By sunset, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers. I had challenged the throne of Karendom, and like every tyrant pushed back for the first time, she didn't retreat. She escalated. Karen did not approach this situation quietly. She marched with fury, armed with entitlement and fueled by humiliation. Overnight, she spun the narrative that I had threatened community harmony by refusing her public beautification initiative. She framed herself as a visionary leader facing an unreasonable homeowner, a martyr for neighborhood progress. It was astonishing how quickly a false story could travel in a place where gossip flowed faster than common sense. I received another letter, this time printed with the official HOA header. A mandatory compliance review meeting was scheduled. Attendance required. Tone dripping with authority the board did not possess. According to this document, my refusal to surrender my yard for communal horticultural development demonstrated non-cooperative community spirit. I was instructed to appear before the board to justify my resistance. The audacity was breathtaking. The meeting took place in the clubhouse, folding chairs arranged like a courtroom, with the board seated like robed judges. But there were no robes, just polo shirts, laminated name tags, and faces that believed they governed a kingdom instead of a subdivision. Karen sat at the center, posture rigid, eyes sharp with manufactured righteousness. She expected capitulation, she expected fear, she expected obedience. I arrived prepared, not for confrontation but for clarity. I brought property documents, boundary maps, municipal zoning law printouts, copies of my invoice neatly stapled. Calmness was my armor. They initiated the proceedings as though they were disciplining a wayward student. With stern expressions and clipped phrases, they tried to position themselves as authority figures guarding the neighborhood's interests. They spoke of shared vision, community values, and collective resource enhancement. They claimed my yard was underutilized and that the HOA had the right to repurpose spaces for the greater good. It sounded like someone had swallowed a dictionary and choked on the word power. And then, the star of the show, Karen, unveiled her plan. She detailed her vision as if unveiling a national monument. She described seating benches, open access gates, community vegetable beds, scheduled group planting days. My private retreat was transformed into a public park in her mind, complete with visiting hours and volunteer rosters. Even as she spoke, she radiated certainty. In her world, she wasn't invading my rights, she was improving the neighborhood. She assumed moral superiority, expecting applause. She waited for my compliance like a queen waiting for subjects to kneel. But instead, I quietly slid my packet of documents across the table. Official property deed, lot survey, fence permit, state private property statutes, municipal code explicitly confirming homeowners' exclusive rights to enclosed yards. Silence replaced arrogance. Paper rustled like leaves in a storm as they flipped through undeniable evidence. My voice never rose. Authority didn't need volume, it needed fact, and I delivered fact. Then, the final blow. The invoice, rent calculation, administrative fee, late penalty schedule. It sat like a loaded trap. They had claimed communal use. I had formalized the consequences. They weren't landlords, they were trespassers. Confusion cracked confidence. For a brief moment, I saw panic beneath their polished expressions. But pride is stubborn, and Karen's delusion was deeper than logic could reach. She declared with trembling insistence that the HOA held supremacy over private land within community boundaries. A statement that legally held less weight than a leaf caught in a breeze. I responded not with hostility, but with future implications. Unauthorized use of private land carried liability. Any injury on community garden grounds, their responsibility. Damage to property, their insurance. Violated zoning, municipal fines. The bill wouldn't be mine, it would be theirs. Suddenly the dream garden looked less like paradise and more like a lawsuit waiting to bloom. The rooms split. Some board members recoiled, realizing Karen had dragged them into a legal minefield. Others stared blankly, unable to comprehend the depth of their miscalculation. Karen, however, clung to her fantasy, convinced reality would bow to her persistence. She dismissed the invoice, dismissed the law, dismissed property rights, but she couldn't dismiss consequence. The meeting adjourned not with resolution, but with simmering conflict. The board retreated to deliberate. Karen stormed away, carrying herself like a warrior denied glory. She wasn't defeated, not in her mind. She simply needed a new tactic, and she found one. 2 days later, bright neon signs appeared along my fence. Community garden, under beautification, as if declaring something made it true, as if declaring ownership erased decades of property law. She placed potted plants at my gate, left handwritten notes about volunteer shifts, even scheduled a community planting day. Flyers, distributed to neighbors, framed me as uncooperative and urged them to participate in beautifying the shared garden. The absurd transformation of my yard into a propaganda battleground would have been comical if it weren't such a violation. She turned social perception into a weapon. In her mind, public support equaled authority. If enough people believed the lie, reality would yield. But fantasy meets truth eventually, and I made sure truth had documentation, timestamps, and a paper trail thicker than her ego. I contacted the city zoning office, filed a formal complaint, provided recordings, flyers, photos, and the trespass signs she placed. Municipal authorities do not take kindly to people inventing land use rights, especially ones who distribute unauthorized public space notices. The fallout came quickly. City inspectors visited. Karen tried to assert control, but her tone shifted from confident to panicked when they asked for authorization. She had none, because none existed. The board scrambled, pretending ignorance. They tried to distance themselves, leaving Karen exposed. And then came the city's verdict. Trespass, unauthorized zoning claims, violation of property rights, potential fines, liability warnings, legal consequences printed in bold. The town did not treat delusion as policy, and suddenly the Queen stood alone. Her power evaporated the moment law entered the room. But humiliation births spite. She withdrew not in defeat, but in wounded pride, and wounded pride becomes dangerous. She shifted tactics again. She wanted payback. She wanted to teach me a lesson. And her next move? She tried to fine me. Yes, the same woman who illegally declared my yard public tried to issue penalties for refusing her fantasy. And that's when I turned the invoice into a legally backed debt. She wanted a war, so I gave her paperwork. When Karen attempted to fine me, she crossed a line even the most aggressive boards hesitate to approach. She fabricated citations, handwritten, stamped with the HOA seal like some medieval decree. She accused me of obstructing community projects, refusing aesthetic compliance, and anti-participatory conduct. To her, ridiculous terminology created legitimacy. The fines totaled nearly $2,000, a number meant to intimidate, but instead it revealed desperation. I didn't respond emotionally. Emotion fuels conflict. Paperwork resolves it. I drafted a formal statement rejecting every claim and attached proof of property rights once more. Then I advanced the invoice from notice to official demand for payment, citing unauthorized communal use, trespass, and forced public value appropriation. It was no longer a warning. It was a bill backed by state statutes and municipal zoning enforcement. The board panicked. Their unity fractured. Several members reached out privately, insisting they never supported the garden idea. They feared liability. They feared legal exposure. They feared the ugly truth. They let entitlement lead them into potential litigation. But Karen refused to yield. Her ego had taken the wheel and was steering toward a cliff. She believed if she backed down, she'd lose the image she built, the controlling neighborhood monarch. But while she clung to fantasy, I gathered allies, quiet residents who had suffered her petty reign, shared stories, threats over mailbox paint shades, fines for invisible grass clippings, warnings about improper bird feeder placement. She was not a leader, she was a tyrant, and tyrants fall. I filed an official demand through certified mail, sent copies to the board, city records, and my attorney. Yes, I consulted one, not because I feared losing, but because professionalism terrifies bullies. She expected hostility. She received structure. She expected yelling. She received signatures. Structure is kryptonite to self-appointed dictators. Words spread. Neighbors whispered, some celebrated quietly, years of silent frustration finding vindication. Others feigned neutrality, not out of loyalty to Karen, but out of instinctive fear of people who crave control. And then the inevitable happened. Karen cracked. She stormed to my property again, this time not with confidence, but panic disguised as rage. She posted a final, desperate notice claiming emergency HOA executive authority. Her last attempt at enforcing imaginary power. She announced her intention to collect outstanding fines and threatened property lien action. A power she did not possess, and a move so illegal it bordered on comical. I didn't confront her. I didn't argue. I simply documented, photographed, time-stamped, and forwarded everything to the appropriate legal and municipal channels. 3 days later, the board held another emergency meeting. This time, the atmosphere was not commanding. It was fearful. City officials attended. A legal advisor from the municipality attended. The board looked like schoolchildren caught cheating on an exam, trying to explain how they ended up forging authority over private land. Karen tried to defend herself, citing community benefit. But words don't override law. Her last shield, the illusion of authority, dissolved under scrutiny. The board removed her as president, effective immediately, stripped her access to HOA funds, mailing lists, and enforcement rights. Her clipboard, the symbol of her tyranny, confiscated like contraband. Then came the compromise. The board offered a formal apology, written, signed, publicly delivered. They also agreed to cover my legal consultation fees and administrative filing costs. In other words, they paid my invoice, indirectly, to avoid further escalation. Publicly, I accepted. Privately, I savored the poetic symmetry. She tried to charge me. She ended up paying instead. As for Karen, she didn't accept reality gracefully. She sulked, raged, and sulked again. Her presence around the neighborhood shrank. She avoided eye contact. Her power evaporated. Her legend, the self-appointed ruler, became a cautionary tale. The yard remained mine. The fence stayed firm. My sanctuary stood untouched. I planted new flowers, not for the neighborhood, but for peace. And every time I watered them, I remembered one truth. Some people aren't satisfied with what they have. They crave control over what belongs to others. They think authority equals power. But real power? Real power lies in knowing your rights, standing your ground, and using the system they worship against them. Karen tried to turn my private yard into a community garden. Instead, she turned her reputation into compost. And the rent? It got paid, just not by me.